Pastor Ralph Douglas West, pastor of the Church Without Walls, and I'm so excited that you've joined us today. Our heart is to usher lost souls to Christ, empower believers towards spiritual maturity, and I'm thrilled to share that heart with you today through the life-transforming power of the Word of God. I also want to invite you to get a daily encouragement by signing in for my free devotional at ralphdouglaswest.org. Now, let's hear today's message. Be encouraged. And so these mute men of the master who had closed their mouths out of fear saw Paul in prison. We know where he was, house arrest in Caesar's household. And so they may have been passing by and listening to conversations and seeing glimpses of him inside the house, saying, if he can talk about Christ in chains, certainly I can talk about Christ in my freedom. This should be a word for all of us. When we consider men and women today, not figuratively, literally, not metaphorically, but literally, men and women in other parts of the world who could lose their life for speaking the truth about Jesus Christ, if they can do it under oppression and military and political aggression, what more should we be able to do in the land of the free and the home of the brave? This morning, Paul says they gained confidence. I like to believe it looked something like this, that you had some Jew, some Christian convert looking over at Paul and watching him in chains and winning some soldier to Christ, and they having to unchain that soldier to put another soldier that didn't know Jesus next to Paul. And somebody who was fearful says, I can do that. I don't have chains. I can do that in my freedom. Or some Roman centurion who works in the employ, who's a Christian now, that says if he can share Christ and love God and worship him in those conditions, certainly I can do that. A gladiator going to battle, having to stand under Nero's governance and saying, if he can do that, then I can lay down my brutality and just lose my life. For he says, for me to live is Christ. That's what Paul was getting to. Let me ask you now, very seriously. Not only do you live for Christ, but can you live for him in a way that those words become your confession? For me to live is Christ. You remember when you had to read those history books in high school, and there were certain historical figures we all liked, like Mary of Scots, and they start calling up Bloody Mary, and people drink her every morning trying to get started. Well, Mary was mean. And she was given a name, Bloody Mary. And there was a preacher by the name of John Knox, the father of Presbyterianism. And Knox would preach about Christ. And Queen Mary had him locked up and in prison, and he would look out the slits of his cell of confinement, and across the terrain he would see looming in the distance his church, St. John's. And he said, in that prison cell, I shall preach there again. That was his single priority. And he did. Mary was executed and John was liberated. When we live by a single focus of priority, God has a way of making a way out of ways that are no way. But not only do we say, for me to live is Christ, and it changes my difficult circumstances, but it also affects human relationships. When you come down here to verse 15, 16, 17, even 18, you pick up some things that began to happen. It says that there was those who were out preaching while Paul was in prison. And he describes the kind of preaching that they were doing. Some preach, you see it, out of envy and strife, and others out of goodwill. And then in the very next verse, he speaks of those, he says, that those who preached out of love, those that did that, they knew that he was appointed for the defense, you see that, of the gospel. I want you to get the picture. He's in prison, right? There's preaching going on, and there's preaching conducted under different motives. And there was some preaching out of envy, rivalry, but some out of goodwill or love. And they knew Paul had come as a vocal piece to the Gentile world for the gospel. But then beyond that, he says, but these others that are proclaiming this message, some are adding anxiety to my very imprisonment while I'm in chain. Interpretation. There are some people that believe that they have been divinely deputized to have the ministry of agitation. There are some people that go around life and their whole sole priority is to be a rock in your shoe. These were men who were irritating the very Apostle Paul and adding affliction to his condition in prison. Now, these are some words here not to overlook, and the primary word is to get behind the motivation of why they're doing what they're doing. In their motivation of proclamation, he mentioned some things: rivalries, narcissism, self-absorption. That's what he's getting to. So I'm out of love because I'm out of, he said, but these people are adding to my grief. That's what some of them are doing. Now the question is, who are these people? And there are multiple suggestions. Some suggest that these are Judaizers. That's probably not true. Judaizers are those now who want to bring the Christians back over, saying they had to ascribe to something that Moses had prescribed in order for them to be a Christian. Some say that's who they are, but that's probably not true, because you've read Philippians, you come to chapter 3, and you see that God is saying, beware of these particular people. So they're probably discounted. Another group may be the founders of the Roman Church. Now, this is a good possibility and a likely one. Paul didn't found the Roman church, but Paul wanted to get to Rome, and possibly because of his charismatic influence, some of the leaders of the Roman church thought that he was about to insert his apostolic positioning on them, take over their church. And so maybe they became the rock in Paul's shoe. But then there's another group, and that were those who were in partnership with Paul. Those that worked alongside of him in ministry and became jealous of Paul, and then they broke away from Paul and started undermining Paul and started trying to create their own sects, S-E-C-T-S. In opposition of Paul. That might be the one. But Paul is so mature that he will not reduce himself to the size of a raisin. Listen to what Paul says when that might be the possibility. He says, now, as long as the message is Jesus Christ, they can do whatever they want to do. I don't like their motivation, but I pray that their ministry and message transcends their pettiness so that nothing will get in the way of Jesus Christ. I've asked you this periodically in this church. May we never let anything in our own person get in the way of why we show up on Sunday morning. Jesus is the reason for us being here. You may be having trouble at home, with your spouse, with your children, with your health, with your work. But when you come here, may me walk through the door and say, for me to live is Christ. Let me give him at least 1 hour out of the whole week. For me to live is Christ. Paul is something, isn't he? And Paul moves now, and I'm done. This leads us up to now why Paul makes that grand confession. For me to live is Christ. Well, in doing so, the Apostle Paul draws our attention, and I'm done with this, to help us know in the what does it matter why he rejoices. You see that? Verse 18, what does it matter? That in every way false motives are true. Christ is what? Preached. And it's in this I rejoice. Church, let me tell you something. On Sunday morning, I don't care, when you walk through here at this sacred moment, you ought to ask God, Lord, whatever that man got to say that you've given to him, clear every distraction so that Christ may be preached. I'm serious about this. And Paul said, in this, that is, in the present, in this I rejoice. Now get this now, in this, that's the present, I will rejoice. But then he looks to the future. He says, and in this I will rejoice. Paul's life is bracketed present and future with rejoice. So what does rejoice look like? I'm glad you asked. Rejoice has very little to do with how many times you wave your hand or stand up. This may be an expression of your joy. Paul rejoices in joy because his confidence is in connection with who Jesus Christ is. That is, when you know who Christ is, you can rejoice. That's where your joy comes from, out of the confidence of who Jesus Christ is. I will rejoice. I'm done. Can I say one last thing? Now move to verse 21, because not only is there the transformative power of a single priority in our circumstance and in our personal relationships, because once Christ is a hold of us, relationships begin to change with people around us, in the prison that he's in. The guards are being converted. Paul has a maturity now that he says, I wish you were on my side, but as long as Christ is being preached, I'm going to rejoice at that. And God can use you in your confinement to affect the relationship of people in your concentric circle of contact. That's why we read some of these stories. Our young people in high school, they're told, read Anne Frank's diary. I remember my children, well, why we got to read this? And I said, I can answer that for you. You're not reading it. One, you read because reading is fundamental. You read it not just because you have been exposed to a person autobiographically and their experiences in memoir, but you read it to see how human beings react under certain conditions. I like looking at the reading list that teachers give their students in high school. They have to read Elie Wiesel's Night. Wiesel's trekking his life along with his father as they are taken to the concentration camps of Auschwitz. And the dominant figure of the story is the blue-eyed boy who is hanged. And his death is protracted. And Elie Wiesel never loses that focus for the rest of his life. You read Viktor Frankl not just to say you read it, but you see and answer the statement, man's search for meaning. That man is always looking for the significance of living. But significance of life is not found in psychoanalytical living. It is when we can say, for me to live is Christ. You don't just read Dietrich Bonhoeffer's letters from prison. It shows you how a person under that kind of persecution can persist in the love of God. But it also teaches you can love God with every fiber of your being, but it doesn't mean that God's going to get you out of your situation. But it does say God will be with you in your situation. I prefer to be out of it. But if I can't be out of it, I sure want him to be in it. The personal relationships of Martin Luther King are changed in the letter from the Birmingham jail. As he calls other pastors to come alongside of him and say, no, I can't wait. Justice delayed is justice denied. That's what it means. For me to live is Christ. I'm done now. We're on the other side of verse 21 at verse 22 now. And Paul is merely going to give us two glimpses and I'm done. He says, now listen, I got an option. And I ascribe to the idea that Paul is in prison now. He will be released and he will continue to take the gospel forward, and then he'll be imprisoned again and then be decapitated. I don't think this is the end of him right here. I think he gets out, he goes on, and he goes back. You just couldn't keep Paul out of jail. And so he gives the reasons for living, and I'm done. And that is, for me to live is Christ. Not only changes my difficult circumstances and affect human relationships, but it gives me a vision for the future uncertainty. Paul didn't know. He just simply said, and I'm done, if I live in the flesh, he said, it's fruitful work for me. I don't know which one I'll choose. I'm pressed by both. And then he says, I have the desire to depart and be with Christ. Don't move. I desire to depart. That's a picture. That is the picture of a boat being unfastened from its mooring or slipping into the docks and being pushed out. It is the image of a camper striking camp, pulling up tents and moving on. Paul said, I desire to pick up my tent, fold it up, and move upstairs. He says, I'm telling you, and then he said it'll be far better. It's really a triple comparative. It reads, it's far, far, far better. Far better if I could pack up and move on. Because at that moment, I know what my future end shall be. I'll be in the presence of the Lord forever. I know what the end is if I did that. But for your sake, Paul says, I may have to stay. And if I can stay, I can preach. If I stay, I can plant churches. If I can stay, I can write more letters. If I stay, I can go into more churches. If I stay, I can develop more men and women for ministry. If I stay, I can win more people for Christ. If I stay. But stay or not, I live by one transformative single priority, and that is for me to wake up in the morning is Christ and nothing else. What a way to live. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He lived by a single priority. There's some people that live by single priorities. They are one thing kind of people. I mean, you just throw out the name and you just are able to match up. They're just one thing people, whether they're on the scene or off the scene. I mean, you think about Babe Ruth. He's been off the scene forever. But as soon as you hear Babe Ruth, the first thing you see is, I mean, it's just the way it is. You know, if you say Michael Jordan, you say, it's just what the way life is designed. You know, it's just that way. It's some people that live for one thing. Paul's one thing was not letters, not theology, not tense. It was Jesus Christ. But where did he get it from? I'm glad you asked. He got it from another one thing person who one day left glory and came down to earth. And say, I come down here for one reason. He said, I come to seek and to save that which is lost. I don't know what your one thing is, but you ought to add in your arsenal. For me to live is, but to die is gain. Jesus is the reason for my living. He's my Alpha and my Omega, my first and my last, my beginning and my end. He's my shelter. He's my rock. He is. Yeah. That was Paul's and our single priority. Church, how do you put all that into play? I'm glad you asked. This morning, take Christ with you, but you say, Paz, I need to know how do I make that work? Well, maybe you have a difficulty reading the scripture. Take your phone and you ought to set your alarm to say, what's a time for you to say, I'm going to read my Bible? And maybe you say, I don't have the appetite to read a chapter a day. Read a verse a day or a paragraph a day. But set your clock. That'll be a good way. Your watch. Most of us keep our phones with us and just set it to say, I'll read this verse or verses every day. That's how you start living for Christ. And then maybe you'll say, boy, I have a hard time praying. Only time I pray was when I'm in trouble. Just set your alarm and put on there, I'm in trouble. I got a need. And talk to God. Yeah. Maybe you say, I always hear our mission and vision of the church talk about Jesus, but I don't want to be seen as a religious fanatic. Here's what you do. Find you another brother or sister and say, you know, we talk about the game every week and unapologetically, you know, we talk like experts. We talk like we know everything about the team. We talk like we just had breakfast with the team players. And we don't know nothing about these people. And yet, the very God that we say we love, that wakes us up in the morning, we never ever talk about him or to him until we're in trouble. Why don't we today, not all day, set aside in our conversation that we can give Christ 5 minutes. I mean, of uninterrupted conversation. You see, church, what I don't want to happen to you is what I've seen as a pastor happen for so many years, for all my life. The people will sit just like this, and they'll sit under Bible preaching, take it for granted, walk out, never do it. And then when their life start unraveling, I remember for years I would tell parents this, and I meant it. They would bring their children when their children were maybe misbehaving, disobedient, not respectful. I'm going to tell Pastor West. And they would bring, I said, don't turn me into no police. And what I meant by that is to make God, like the only time he's worth talking to or being around is when there's trouble. All I'm saying is live for Christ while you're healthy. Live for Christ now while you're energetic. You see, so that when you come to those tough spots, and you're going to have them, tough spots and dead spots, dead spots. When you come against them, then you don't have to panic. People say, well, Lord, I would thought that you'd be praying. I said, no, I'm doing what I do every day. Every day. For me to live is Christ. That's what it means. That when you say that God will and can change your circumstances, affect your human relationships, and settle your future uncertainty. And the future is far, far better. But chances are you'll be here for a day or two longer. So since we're here, let's make the best of the rest of our life. For Christ we live. The secret to joy has nothing to do with what you're going through. It has everything to do with who you know. That's because deep, abiding joy comes from making Jesus Christ the singular focus of your life. I want to help you by sending you my 6-message CD series from the book of Philippians, Joy to the Second Power. This series is my gift to thank you for your donation today to help transform more lives through the power of gospel. So give now or go online to give and get your copy of Joy to the Second Power. Thank you and be encouraged. Hi, I'm Pastor Ralph Douglas West. I want to personally invite you to attend one of the most amazing church growth and development conferences in the country, the IC3 Issachar Church Growth and Development Conference. This year's theme is Who's Shaping Who? Church, culture, and community. Our mission is to equip leaders to grow their churches, connect with communities, and transform an unchurched culture. April 25th through the 27th, you and your church leaders will experience 3 days of dynamic preaching, teaching, and storytelling, along with practical ideas and solutions on how to reach your community and grow your church. We have assembled what I believe is the best teaching team of pastors and leaders from across the country to come and share with you. Over 50 very practical breakout sessions, like every Sunday is a Super Bowl Sunday, developing a 21st century staff, taking the stew out of stewardship, preparing green pastures for pastors, leading through conflict, and many, many, many more. So sign up today, bring your entire staff and ministry leaders for a time of learning, networking, and inspiration. For conference details and registration, go to ic3churchconference.com. Again, that's ic3churchconference.com. Be encouraged.